familiar with.
Let's start, sir.
करिए सर, बिल्कुल.
Very good evening. I welcome all of you on behalf of Pusa Road CP Study Circle. Today's webinar on prosecution under Income Tax Act, and on this subject, our very learned and experienced CA turned advocate Gagan Kumar is with us, and it is my privilege to introduce him. Gagan ji is a commerce graduate from Delhi University, member of Bar Council of Delhi, and a fellow member of our Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Before setting up Krishnomics Legal, Gaganji was principal associate with Amarchand and Mangaldas, now known as Sardul Amarchand Mangaldas. He also works with KPMG. He brings with him over 2 decades of experience. Gaganji has specialized in tax and commercial litigation and advisory. He has successfully represented various corporate before Supreme Court, High Court, Tax Tribunal, District Courts, National Company Law Tribunal, and various consumer forum. He has also appeared before the Permanent Court of Arbitration as an expert witness. He predominantly practiced at Delhi High Court. He has recognized one of the tax controversy leader by International Tax Review, London, consecutively for 6 years since 2013. India's leading corporate tax lawyer by the International Who's Who Legal in 2012. Adjudged as one of the top 10 startup in legal sector by Startup City magazine in April 2017. Gaganji is president of Delhi chapter of Indian Law Association. He regularly speaks at various national and international forums. He is a member of Delhi High Court Bar Association and American Bar Association. He regularly contributes articles to various national and international journal and newspaper. He has also authored a book on tax prosecution under Income Tax and GST and search and seizure under Income Tax Act. And I am very fortunate that I have gone through his books written by him on search and seizure. Over the year, Gaganji has advised several domestic and international companies, private equity funds, as well as various not-for-profit organizations on various tax issues relating to corporate tax, transfer pricing, merger and restructuring, tax prosecution, value-added tax, central excise, custom service tax, and regulatory laws like FEMA and FCRA, etc. Gaganji also sits on the board of several companies as independent director. He is also the vice president of Rotary Club of Delhi West. This is the brief profile of today's our learned speaker. With this, I also welcome our very senior member, Sri Anil Kumar Srivastav ji and Mudit Kumar Jain ji. I welcome all of you, sir, and all attendee. And over to Gaganji, sir. Welcome, sir, once again to you, sir.
Thank you, Rajesh, for giving introduction, and thanks to Pusa Road CP Study Circle. And it's been an honor and privilege to speak again, in front of this August gathering. And many thanks to Anilji for being there. His presence really encourages and gives a moral support. Thank you, Moditji. So should I share the screen? That would be comfortable?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it visible?
Not yet, sir, not yet. आया नहीं सर स्क्रीन अभी आपकी
आगे सर.
आगे आगे.
So the topic is tax prosecution, and this is chapter 22, which as chartered accountants we often ignore because no question is asked. And during our practice also, this is one of the chapter which is rarely touched upon, and unless for the very recent few years when tax department have started sending out notices, then we learned about this chapter. And personally speaking, I also got into this that one of the client received a notice, and for the first time I was surprised that array income tax department ye sections we use karta hai. So that's how it all started. And just to give you brief background as to uh, why prosecution in cases like fiscal offenses. And I'll just read out one paragraph from one of the recent judgment of Supreme Court and most talked about case of Mr. P. Chidambaram versus Enforcement Directorate. The observation given is like this, that the entire community is aggrieved if the economic offenders who ruin the economy of the state are not brought to book. A murder may be committed in the heat of moment upon passion being aroused. An economic offense is committed with cool calculation and deliberate design, with an eye on personal profit, regardless of the consequences to the community. A disregard for the interest of the community can be manifested only at the cost of forfeiting the trust and faith of the community in the system to administer justice in an even handed manner without fear of criticism from the quarters which view white collar crimes with a permissive eye, unmindful of the damage done to the national economy and national interest. So this really sets the tone that why fiscal offenses at all are being subject to prosecution. And if I may just take you to back to the little history, uh, India witnessed first mutiny in 1857, and in 1860, for the first time, when the coffers of British were empty, 1860 they introduced a temporary levy which was for a period of 5 years. Then in 1867 again they came up with something called license tax, which was based on the tax on income. Then in 1868 this was supplanted by something called certificate tax, which was more or less something similar on the lines of license tax only. Then moving on to 1869, ultimately one form of income tax was introduced, but all these legislation were so far remained temporary in nature until 1873. And in 1873, this income tax was abolished at all. Then happened the Great Famine of 1876 to 78, and thereafter in 1877, again a law was introduced, but this was applicable to Punjab and other provinces of India, which essentially led to the introduction of 1922 Act. And this is the first time when the prosecution provisions were introduced for non-payment of income tax. Now, if we look at before we really proceed on the prosecution, there are certain basic terms which we must analyze. And if you would see the couple of terms which you would come across in any of the tax prosecution or prosecution matter for that matter, there are offenses which are bailable offenses, and then there are offenses which are non-bailable offenses. So just to give you a perspective, bailable offenses are those offenses where even the police officer has the right to grant you a bail, and non-bailable offenses are the offenses where bail can only be granted by the magistrate. Then we talk about cognizable offenses and non-cognizable offenses. Why I'm talking about these terms, I'll gradually explain you over a period of this presentation. And it would be very important to know these terms. So cognizable offenses are the offenses where police officer can take cognizance, and if need be, he can arrest you. or arrest the accused. And in non-cognizable offenses, only the magistrate can give an order for taking the cognizance of the offense. Then the way CRPC is drafted, cases are divided into two categories: summons cases and warrant cases. Summon cases are those cases which are where usually the punishment is less than 2 years, and magistrate can administer that. And warrant cases are the cases where the punishment is for more than 2 years. Now, where do we fall when we look at the offenses, let's say non-payment of TDS? The punishment prescribed in section 276B is between 3 to 7 years. Now, if we look at the CRPC, the punishment for offense where the maximum punishment is up to 7 years is an offense which is cognizable and non-bailable. Now, these are two important aspects, and I'll briefly touch upon the Black Money Act also here. A similar provision in the Black Money has also a provision where in section 51, the offense has a punishment of more 3 years and above. Now, why in income tax no one comes and arrests anyone? The answer lies in section 279A of the Income Tax Act. And as you can see, it is on the screen. It essentially overrides the provisions of CRPC as far as section 276B, 276C, or 276CC or 277 and 278 are concerned. Meaning thereby that though by virtue of the provisions contained in CRPC, these offenses are cognizable and police can take cognizance of these offenses, but by virtue of protection given under section 279A, police cannot come and take cognizance because they have been made non-cognizable offenses. Now, if we start on the relevant sections, beginning with section 275A. Now, 275A is a provision which comes into picture if there is a contravention of an order made under section 132 subsection 3. As you all know that in case of a search, in case the assets cannot be moved out or cannot be seized, then a restraint order may be passed by the officer in charge. And if anyone violates that order, that may trigger this particular section, which is section 275A. Now, just to give you a perspective, if you look at this case, Sanjay Sinha versus Union of India, what had happened in this case was that the prohibitory order was issued qua a particular bank account that you cannot use this bank account. The assessee, however, issued certain checks, but those checks were issued from another account. Department launched prosecution saying that you have violated the prohibitory order and you have used the bank account, and therefore you are subject to prosecution under this section. The matter went to the High Court, and the point which was raised by the assessee was that you had raised order of prohibition against a particular bank account, whereas I had used another bank account, and therefore this is not a violation of prohibitory order, and hence no question of prosecution would arise. However, in this another judgment, State of Maharashtra versus Narayan Champalal Bajaj, what had happened is that the search was being carried out and the search party put a lock on one of the cupboard and they had to come next day to continue the search. In the meanwhile, what the assessee did, he cut the backside of the almirah and took out certain contents from the almirah, and so the lock was not touched, as such, but the content of the cupboard was reduced. Next day, when the search party resumed search, they realized that the content has been lesser as compared to the previous day. Prosecution was launched, and this is how the trial court functions. Prosecution was launched, but the offense was not proved. Offense was not proved on two counts. One, it was said that it was never established before the trial court that the content which was missing was undisclosed income. And more interestingly, what was not proved, that the cupboard from which the alleged reduction took place in the content was never produced as an evidence before the magistrate. So on that count, they were let go. But the department pursued it before High Court. And in High Court, one of the allegation or the prosecution section was also of the IPC, Indian Penal Code, and therein the contention was that this is a breach of trust, and on those counts they were held guilty. So this is how Section 275A functions. Now, if we move on to the next section, which is very pertinent as far as our fraternity is concerned, which is Section 275B. Now, when does Section 275B comes into picture? 275B comes into picture when a person who is required to afford the authorized officer the necessary facility to inspect the books of accounts or other documents as required under Section 132 fails to afford such facility to the authorized officer. So now what happened is, in one of the cases which is mentioned in the second bullet, is that the audit team was sitting at the client's place and suddenly a search took place. When the search took place, the search party not only confiscated the electronic record of the assessee, but they also confiscated the laptops of I think this
auditor.
Yeah, auditors. No, someone raised a hand, so there's some question on that.
वो सब last में करेंगे सब question.
Okay. So the auditors' the laptops were also seized. The auditors approached High Court, and it was ultimately held that, and I'll just read out this from the relevant portion of the judgment, that coming back to the contentions of the petitioner, it has argued that laptops that have been seized by the respondent have confidential information relating to the accounts of 46 other clients. So what was held was that you came to search only for a particular client, whereas the data in the laptops of the auditors was containing data of 46 other clients. And it was held that since there are no allegation or no search warrant against those people, so you cannot seize those laptops. So on this ground, they were allowed to, they were asked to release the laptops of the auditors. Now, Section 276, though may it look very innocuous section, it essentially says that if someone tries to remove the property in order to avoid recovery of any tax, then prosecution may be initiated. Now, I have mentioned here a very old judgment which is relating to Chapter 20C, which is no longer applicable. But how it may be relevant in the present time as well, I'll just explain in a minute. Just give me a second, please. Sorry. So in this case, Diwan Rahul Nanda versus Nitish Jikotik, as you would notice that none of the party here is a tax authority. So under erstwhile chapter 20C, there was this provision that if you are selling an immovable property beyond certain threshold limit, one needed to obtain a NOC from the income tax department. And if at any point in time the income tax department believed that the property is undervalued, then the department had the option to purchase the property at that value itself. So this buyer had the concern that his property may be attached under this particular chapter because no NOC as such was obtained. So they approached the court. Court directed them to deposit the amount with the court until the NOC is obtained. 3 months went on and nothing was deposited with the court. The buyer again reached out to the High Court and pointed out this, that the no money as such has been deposited with the court. Now court made a very interesting observation in this judgment. Court said that if you will not do so, then both the parties run risk of prosecution under section 276. Now, although this chapter is no longer relevant, but I would like to draw your attention to a provision which is oftenly used these days in all merger and acquisition cases, and also whenever a bank charge is created, that is section 281. Certain transfers to be void. And what this provides is that if certain transfer is happening, but before any service of notice under rule 2 of second schedule, that is recovery proceedings, then the transaction may be declared void if it is for inadequate consideration or if it is without the previous permission of the assessing officer. So therefore, in your practice, you would have often reached out to the tax department to seek a NOC under section 281. The question therefore would arise is that can someone be prosecuted if later on for any reason transaction is declared void under section 281? A possible view could be yes, but so far to the best of my research, I have not come across any judgment so far. But taking a cue from the principle which was mentioned in this particular judgment, there could be a possible scenario. Moving on to the next section, 276A. 276A comes into picture when a company has been ordered to be liquidated and liquidator fails to set aside certain amount towards the tax liability, and in that event prosecution can be initiated against section 178. Now you may wonder that liquidation may not happen so frequently these days, but since the introduction of insolvency law, IRPs are being appointed and most of our professional brothers are acting as IRPs. So the question may arise that would this kind of exposure IRP be facing if he does not set aside any money for payment of tax? The answer has been given in the subsection 6 of this particular section itself, and it has been amended since then, whereby IBC overrides this particular provision. So again, we need not worry as IRP, and we may not be prosecuted under this particular section in our capacity as resolution professionals. 276 AB is practically redundant now because this was applicable when transactions were taking place under chapter 20C, which I briefly spoke about a while ago. Now, the most interesting provision, section 276B. I would like you to read this section with me very carefully. The section reads like this. if a person fails to pay to the credit of central government, clause A, that is where most of the notices are often issued, the tax deducted at source by him as required by or under the provisions of Chapter 17B. Now, if you look at the index of the Income Tax Act, and if you have a look at where does Chapter 17B begins and where does it end. Chapter 17B begins at starting with section 192 and it goes up to section 206 AA. In this whole journey from 192 to 206 AA, we do come across section 201 and more importantly, section 2011A. Now, we all know that 2011A is invoked when interest is to be paid for delayed payment of TDS. This is in contradistinction to clause B, where if you read it again, if a person fails to pay to the credit of central government, coming to clause B second, the second proviso to section 194B, or for that moment, for that purpose, clause 1, subsection 2 of section 1150. The point which I'm trying to highlight here is that TDS provisions are not mentioned here by way of section. They're mentioned as chapter 17B. Whereas for DDT and lottery, there are specific sections which have been mentioned. Then it goes on to say that he shall be punishable for a term which may be, should not be less than 3 months, but which can go up to 7 years with fine. Now, whenever the prosecution is launched, and this we have been facing time and again, and before I move on to the next part of dealing with section 276B, one of the important aspect here is that mens rea is not a requisite ingredient. So unlike the other provisions where terms used are willful, deliberate, that expression is missing from 276B. So meaning thereby mens rea is not there, actus rea is there. That means if the act itself is wrong, then prosecution can be launched. The question is it really true? And I'll come to that aspect in a while. And before I go on to that, I would like to discuss certain provisions relating to that who can be responsible under section 276B. Now, unlike other sections, 276B talks about principal officer. And the term principal officer has been defined in section 2 subsection 35. So the way prosecution for TDS initiates, the first show cause notice is issued under section 235, asking that why you should not be treated as a principal officer. Now at this juncture, we should be very careful in terms of replying. We have come across cases where we have to fight tooth and nail before trial court to explain that why an independent director, why a professional who is a chartered accountant by profession, merely designated as a director, is not the principal officer. So many of our professional brothers who may be working in industry, they are often given designation as directors, and the consequences can be fatal if they are treated as principal officer in terms of section 235. So therefore it is very important that whenever you accept any position as a director in a company, please clarify your scope, and probably the best way is to put a resolution in place that you will not be a person responsible for handling tax and other issues. So coming back to section 276B. Now, I think there's mix up in the slides. Just give me a second, please. Yeah. So the department often uses this particular judgment, Madhu Milan syntax. And they often quote this particular para and say that there is no mens rea required in TDS violation. So if there is a delay of 1 day only, then also a person can be subject to prosecution. And they often quote this particular para, which reads that we are unable to agree with the above view of High Court. Once a statute requires to pay tax and stipulates period within which such payment is to be made, the payment must be made within that period. If the payment is not made within that period, there is default and an appropriate action can be taken under the Act. Interpretation canvassed by the learned counsel would make the provision relating to prosecution nugatory. Now, no one really points out that what was the view which was being taken by the High Court. So if we read the preceding para to this particular judgment, this para, the counsel for the taxpayer argued and relied on a single judge decision of Calcutta High Court, which made a very funny observation that there is no provision under the Income Tax Act where criminal prosecution can be initiated. So the Supreme Court is referring to that particular judgment and is saying that it is wrong because there is a provision under the Income Tax Act. But the point which I am trying to highlight is that Chapter 17B, it is the violation of Chapter 17B. So if the assessee has paid tax before detection along with interest, is it really a violation of Chapter 17B? Because Chapter 17B starts from 192, goes up to 206 AA. Yes, TDS has to be deposited in terms of Rule 30 within 7 days of the end of the month. But what if it has not been deposited? Since the violation is to be triggered only once the Chapter 17B is violated. That is, tax has been deposited, but the interest has not been deposited. And the tax authorities have detected that violation, and then, yes, they can launch a prosecution. But in a situation where the tax was deposited along with interest, which is under 2011A, my view has been that no violation of Chapter 17B has taken place. Therefore, launching of prosecution under 276B is wrong. And I get support from this view from Section 278AA. Now, 278AA, when it was introduced, prior to its introduction, the language of Section 276B was that if there was a willful default in payment, then the expression willful was removed, but Section 278AA was introduced. What does Section 278AA says? 278AA says that if there are reasonable causes, then prosecution should not be launched. Now, what are the reasonable causes? There are few internal circulars of CBDT to the officers, and one of the circular clearly says that if the interest has been paid before the detection of the case, then that may be regarded as a reasonable cause. So, and though I have yet to get a judgment on this proposition because most of the clients get so scared that they don't want me to argue this case before courts, but go for compounding in the meanwhile. But there, we are currently arguing this matter in one of the district courts, and hopefully by next year we will have a decision on this issue. The point here is that 278 essentially goes on to establish the fact that 276B was never meant to be applied in a situation where there is a minor delay in TDS deposited if the interest has also been deposited. So that's the point which I wanted to highlight. Now, moving on to Section 276C. As you can see, this is upon willful attempt to evade. So in the complaint which is filed before the district court, the complaint often is drafted in a very poor manner, and they do not really explain that how the offense was willful. So I'll just give you an example, and this is from the Delhi Session Court only. What had happened is that the assessee filed his return, but during that time his bank account was attached, so he could not deposit self-assessment tax. Now there was an admitted liability that yes, so much of tax is payable in terms of filing of return under section 139(1), but the tax was not deposited, and ultimately after about 3-4 months their bank account got detached, and ultimately they deposited tax. Prosecution was launched under section 276C that there was a willful evasion of payment of tax. The trial court held the taxpayer guilty and had sentenced them for 3 months imprisonment, but the taxpayer went on to challenge that before the session court. And session court appreciated this aspect, that since the assessee had the intention to pay, but because his bank account was attached, therefore that itself constitutes a reasonable cause, and therefore it is not a willful evasion of payment of tax. The other aspect which we should bear in mind in section 276C, that subsection 1 deals with willful evasion of tax, and subsection 2 deals with willful evasion of payment of tax. So that aspect needs to be borne in mind very carefully, because often the complaint is filed without realizing which subsection. And in trial court, these minor aspects play a very vital role. Now, we spoke about principal officer in section 245. Apart from the TDS provisions, most of the other provisions refer to the term person in charge of and was responsible for the business of the company. What is that expression? That expression essentially means that someone who was calling the shots. Not by merely being a director, you become a person in charge of and responsible for the purpose of business of the assessee company. And the most often relied upon judgment, and this principle has been very eloquently explained in one of the Supreme Court judgment in Pooja Ravinder Devi Dasani. Though this case was under the Negotiable Instrument Act, the check bouncing case, but what really held in this case was that this lady, Pooja Ravinder Devi Dasani, was just a non-executive director and happened to be wife of one of the director. So the point which was highlighted in this judgment was that she's not the one who is actually controlling the affairs of the company. So why this is relevant? And I go back to the same example where our professional brothers may be acting as sometimes as director finance also in companies, but do they really have the authority to sign checks? Can they decide that, okay, I want to deposit TDS? What if the promoter says that forget about TDS, we'll discuss TDS after 2 months. Let's first clear the payment of this vendor. So though the person may be holding a position of a director, but can he be really called as a person who is in charge of the business? The answer is no, but these facts would have to be borne out of the records. So whenever any such thing happen, please do adequate housekeeping, write some email, do something, bring this thing on record, which could demonstrate in a worst case scenario that yes, I was only acting on the instructions of my promoter and I really never had any authority independent of the promoter. (276)CC. Recently, this section is also being often invoked. Um, we are handling one of the cases under this particular section as well. So what had happened in this case was that the assessee did not file his tax return because the auditors left or his regular CA was not there at the time of filing of return. Later on, he received a notice under 142 and he immediately filed the return. Thereafter, the assessing officer initiated prosecution under 276(c). Now, incidentally, in our client's case, after TDS and advance tax, there was no liability. And the proviso to section 276(c) says that if the liability is less than 3,000, now it has been increased to 10,000, then this section cannot be invoked. However, between 18 and 19, a confusion arose because the amendment was brought in and this limit of 3,000 was removed. But in 2019, this limit was again brought back, but the limit now is 10,000. So these are the minor things which one would have to be careful of when they deal with any of the show cause notice issued by the officer. Because if we miss these things unnecessarily, the matter travels to the trial court, and then you can imagine the plight of the client. So they have to appear there, and they are treated like an accused, and the way they are treated in trial court is completely unimaginable for the people who are not doing this kind of practice. So it's a major embarrassment for the clients because they have to appear on practically every hearing, and this this stand they are given is not a very pleasant view. Okay, moving on to the next section, section 277. Now, suppose some additions are made ultimately. There is a possibility that the department may invoke this provision as well. Because when we sign our return, we say that to the best of my knowledge, the contents are true and correct. So it's a verification of the return. And if there are certain bogus expenses or some untenable expenses are found and department pursues this matter, this could be a case where uh, this section may be invoked on the ground that the verification which was signed was false. Now, one of the critical aspect here is that first of all, there has to be a tax evasion and jurisdiction is to be there. Now, I'll give you an example. Uh, in one of the cases, the assessee signed return in Delhi and his case was ultimately assessed in Kanpur. Now, this prosecution was launched in Kanpur itself. So, when the matter reached to the court, it was held that, see, you have to try this offense only in the jurisdiction where this offense took place. And the offense was false verification of the return declaration. The return was signed in Delhi, so the offense took place in Delhi. So this particular case cannot be tried in jurisdiction before trial court of Kanpur. So therefore, these things are also material if any of these things happens. Secondly, it should also be demonstrated that falsification was intentional. So as I said that if certain bogus expenses have been put in, then it can be established that the falsification was deliberate. 278A. This is again one section which is very important for we chartered accountants, especially when we are rendering tax advice on emails or on in written opinions. This section is invoked when someone abets the false return. So if a CA is suggesting that, okay, let us do one thing, I'll arrange bills for you, you just put in those expenses in your books and reduce your profit, thereby you can reduce your tax liability. If these kinds of things are given in writing, and if department gets a whiff of it, then certainly we can be treated as person who is abating tax evasion or abating signing of a false return. So as professionals, we can also be prosecuted. However, if we are merely accompanying the client during the assessment proceedings and advising him not to say this or not to say that, that would not tantamount to abatement of false return or abatement of tax evasion. Coming to the aspects, procedural aspects, who can grant sanction for prosecution? So ITO or the assessing officer on his own cannot go for and file a complaint before the trial court. Sorry. He has to first obtain a prior sanction from the principal commissioner or commissioner. Uh, Many of us would have received show cause notices from the commissioner under section 279(1), asking them that why the prosecution should not be launched. Now, if we look at the offenses by companies, uh, by very nature, companies are legal entities, and obviously they cannot be imprisoned. So since they cannot be imprisoned, so who can be imprisoned? The principal officer or the person in charge of the business. So that is an individual. So in case of prosecution on companies, while the individual in charge may be put behind the bar, but the fine may be imposed on the company. I'll give you an example, a live example. We are handling a case of prosecution where the company has been transferred under the resolution plan, and the prosecution was initiated before this thing. Now, uh, after the change in management, the resultant company is not willing to go for compounding because their argument is that, look, in a worst case scenario, being a company, and a fine may only be imposed, and under the waterfall mechanism mentioned in section 58 of the IBC, the collection by tax authorities comes at number 4 or number 5. That is only if the money is left, then they can recover something. So we are least bothered, we are not going for the compounding. But look at the plight of the promoter or the director who was in charge. He is facing imprisonment. Now, even if he wants to go for compounding, he cannot because the company is not supporting him. So this is again a flip side of the resolution mechanism which is there emerging now. Now, who would be treated as a person in charge of the company? Now, section 278B lays down a presumption that either the principal officer or any other person who may be regarded as a person in charge will be presumed to be in charge of the business of the company, and prosecution would be launched against him. However, this is a rebuttable presumption, and as I mentioned in the previous segment, that during the course of our daily activities, it is very important that certain basic hygiene issues are maintained, and we as professionals, if are acting in any of these capacity, then it should be brought on record and that presumption must be rebutted. If we look at the offenses by individuals, needless to say, if it is a proprietorship or an individual, then yes, that particular individual would be subject to prosecution. In case of firm or an LLP, it is the director or partner or a limited liability partner in case of LLP. In case of HUF, it would be the Karta who can be prosecuted. And in case of trusts, it could be the trustees. Now let us look at the procedure, how the prosecution is initiated. First of all, a sanction is granted by the commissioner. He does it after issuing a show cause notice, and complaint is to be filed by the officer who is authorized by the commissioner or the commissioner himself. Now, here one thing you must be very careful of when we come across any of the sanction, that whether the application of mind is demonstrated on the face of the sanction order. I'll give you an example. We are doing a case where 2 years prosecution was launched and the proposal went for 1 year only, whereas the sanction letter is given for both the years. Now that itself is a ground that it is a complete lack of application of mind on the part of commissioner while granting sanction. So these subtle points one will have to be really careful of whenever we are dealing with a prosecution situation. The other important aspect which we often come across, that is there a limitation period? कोई 6 साल, कोई 4 साल, कोई limitation period है क्या इसमें कि or they can come anytime. Now, ironically, there is a law which says that in case of fiscal offenses, no limitation would apply. Okay. As you might be aware that on 9th September last year, 2 circulars were issued, circular number 24 and circular number 25. So I will take that up during the course of question answer if you would have any questions. Bottom line is that the point was that if it is 25 lakhs or below, then the prosecution cannot be initiated unless the approval is given by the collegium of 2 commissioners. If it is more than that, then it's more or less automatic. However, what is not clear is that is it the per offense? So in case of TDS, would you see delay in deposit of TDS of every month as a per offense, or will you do a sum total of all the months and see कि सारे महीनों में late जमा हुआ है, which is exceeding 25 lakhs. So there is no clarity as such on that. Reasonable cause I have discussed. Okay, very briefly, just for your consumption, how it would happen. So once a sanction is granted, then a complaint will be filed by the tax department before the magistrate. The first step is that the magistrate looks at the complaint, and if he finds it worthy enough, only then he would issue a summon or a warrant. And once he issues a summon, then it becomes a case. So summon is issued, and then you will have to produce your client before the court and will have to apply for a bail. So he is released on bail. So as I was talking about initially in the very beginning, that the summon case and the warrant case, the procedure is different. Summon case is very summary procedure, just what we often call it as a summary trial. And warrant case is where you get multiple chances of proving your innocence. So in a case of warrant case, which would happen in a case where the punishment is more than 2 years. So for example, in a TDS prosecution, there are 3 ways you can avoid that, not avoid, mitigate that. Is Once the case is framed by the magistrate and bail is obtained, you may either challenge the summoning order, the order through which summons were issued, on the ground of either jurisdiction or lack of application by the judge before the session court. If you don't want to do that, and if you feel that the client has been wrongly implicated, before the court case begins, you may file an application for discharge under Section 245 of CRPC. And during the course of discharge, essentially, you have to rely only on complaint. You cannot bring on new facts, new document, new record, because that would tantamount to carrying out a trial, and that has to be carried out during the course of trial. If discharge is not successful, and if you still believe that your client has a strong case, you may reach High Court under Section 482 of the CRPC, quashing the complaint. And if you have reasonable and strong grounds, High Court may intervene. Coming to the compounding, now, before the complaint is filed, Section 279 allows that the offense can be compounded at any time. So when the notice come for Section 2 under Section 235, treating the person as principal officer, or the show cause notice is issued under 279, or the sanction letter is being discussed, sanction is being discussed, or sometime even after sanction also, you may go for compounding. There is no bar on that. In fact, the district courts are so liberal that even after filing of complaint, if you go and pray that we are willing to go for compounding and our application may be considered by commissioner, they allow that also. So technically, compounding can be done anytime until the case really begins before the trial court in real sense. Now, there are as per the circular, the offenses have been categorized into category A and category B. This is the whole list which you would find in the circular as well. 276, 276B, 276CC, etc. These are the offenses which can be compounded up to 3 occasions. Beyond 3 occasions, the officers are not permitted to compound the offense. If we look at the category B offenses, that is 276C, willful attempt to pay tax, etc., then this can be compounded only once. Compounding fee, if we look at the compounding fees, if the compounding is happening for the first time, then it is 3% per month for the period of delay. And if it is happening for the second time, then it is 5% per month. And in case of 276C, since this can be compounded only once, it is 150% of tax sought to be evaded if it is more than 25 lakhs. If it is less than 25 lakhs, it is 125%. One other aspect which you should bear in mind is that apart from the compounding fee, 10% compounding fee is charged as prosecution establishment expenses. So assuming there are 2 directors or 3 directors for which you are going for compounding, so whatever would be the compounding fee for the company, 10% extra would be charged for each of the director. Apart from that, 10% administrative charges. Now, there are certain situations where compounding is not possible. Compounding is not possible in cases where the person has been convicted under FERA, FEMA, or he has been convicted under any other provisions of the Income Tax Act, or some investigation is going on relating to any anti-national or terrorist activity, or there's some investigation going on with the Enforcement Directorate or CBI. So these are the cases where compounding is not possible. Now, we often come across a question that if I go for compounding in my capacity as a director, do I become a person who is disqualified to be a director because a person convicted cannot be a director? So if I apply for compounding and my offense is compounded, do I disqualify myself as director within the meaning of Companies Act? The answer is no, because compounding is considered as an acquittal. It is not considered as a conviction. Yeah, I'll be happy to take questions now. Rajesh, you are on mute.
I request all the member kindly put your any query in question answer chat box. If there is no question, then we will bind up within 5 minutes. So still there is no question right now. We will wait 1 or 2, 3 minutes. आपका सर इतना एक्सप्लेनेटरी है कि कोई क्वेश्चन आया ही नहीं अभी तक.
तो दो बातें हो सकती है, या तो मैं बहुत अच्छा बोला या मैं कुछ भी समझा नहीं पाया.
नहीं सर आप नहीं समझाते तो सर लोगों के क्वेश्चन होते. इतना अच्छा था आपका कि लोगों को इतना समझ में आ गया होगा. कोई है भी नहीं अभी क्वेश्चन पूछने के लिए. वैसे भी एक क्वेश्चन आया है सर. नवनीत जयरथ जी पूछ रहे हैं, हाउ टू डील विथ प्रोसिक्यूशन फॉर नॉन फाइलिंग ऑफ ITR.
276C
जी,
तो रिटर्न तो फाइल करनी ही पड़ेगी. अब फैक्ट्स और थोड़े से अगर हो तो फिर थोड़ा गाइड हो पाएगा, अदरवाइज तो फिर कंपाउंडिंग ही ऑप्शन है.
ओके. फाइलिंग रिटर्न इज कंपल्सरी आफ्टर नोटिसिंग बाय द असेसिंग ऑफिसर. Jirath ji, I think you are satisfied. Return filed, but CIT confirmed prosecution.
So if return has been filed, then you'll have to see what was the tax liability, and if the tax liability was more than the threshold limit which is mentioned in 276C, then yes, prosecution may be launched. But then you will have to come to the reasonable cause, that if there is reasonable cause that why return could not be filed, and if we satisfy either the commissioner at the time of sanctioning or the court after the complaint has been filed, then yes, we may avoid prosecution. In my company, compounding has been done once. That's okay. So if it is for TDS prosecution or category A prosecution, you can still go for a prosecution. So Jayaraj ji, if there was a refund due to TDS, then it's not subject to prosecution. You can easily win this case before trial court. (276D) can only be prosecuted by principal officer. Just a second. As I mentioned, that section 278B says that person in charge of, so not all the directors. So the person who was in charge of the affairs of the company, he will be prosecuted.
Only the in charge.
Yes.
Now second time it was come for TDS payment delay. Our interest and penalty also paid up. Can I still claim it was not willful?
So as I said, and that is why I took a lot of time on 276B, because the notices are issued in a mechanical manner. And my view has been that if the interest and penalty has been paid before detection, then it is not a violation of Chapter 17B, and therefore prosecution should not be launched. But this is something which commissioners really don't appreciate. So this is something which will have to be tested before the trial court. Second time prosecution notice has come to you. Okay, this.
ये तो हो गया सर, विक्रम जी का
हाँ।
क्वेश्चन रिप्लाई हो।
हाँ। Can late payment of self-assessment tax but before ITR filing be prosecuted? Under which section? 276C. No, 276C did not come into this. $276C can be invoked if there was a delay in payment of self-assessment tax, and if the return was not filed before the due date. Okay, one company SSC did not file ITR after AY 1516 and thereafter 20 shows to know with no notice. What is the professional responsibility? See, your responsibility will begin when they will engage you. Till the time they don't engage you, your only responsibility is to highlight this aspect that they can be prosecuted.
So till then they engage us, there is no professional liability.
So unless someone really becomes my client, I have no duty towards him to explain anything.
But under the Companies Act, sir, there is a system that once you appointed, and if you don't vacate the office, you are appointed.
No, but not that is qua the auditor. But as far as your capacity to advise the company in filing of return is concerned, I don't think that would apply. That principle would apply.
Okay, okay. ये भी चलो हो गया, मैडम का क्वेश्चन था।
Company name is struck off. How to resign? I think this would require a bit of intervention at NCLT level.
Okay. The company name is strike off. How to resign as an auditor?
Could be.
Approach to NCLT, sir.
That would be my view, but I'll have to check the Companies Act on this proposition.
और तो सर इधर कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है। Anyway, sir, thank you very much for your wonderful deliberation and precious time.
Thank you, sir.
Very detailed and illustrative manner. I think all the attendee will be benefited and will take utmost care while discharging their responsibility as an auditor. And I once again thank you for helping us for getting known as a various section and prosecution maybe launched by the commissioner or any other one.